Hey guys. Good morning. Why don't you stand up just for a second? We will get things situated here. You can stretch. You're going to be here a while. No, not really. You can do the weird church thing if you want to. Turn to your neighbor and say, "Hi, neighbor." Any of you raised with Barney? Hi. Hi, neighbor. Hi, neighbor. What is that song? I wish Kristen was here.
Hi, neighbor, throw your worries away.
This morning, I was raised in church. Anybody else have that either privilege or disappointment in your life? Either one? So I was raised in church. I was raised in a Pentecostal church. Any other Pentecostals? Whoop, whoop. Okay. And then went to, our church sort of became what later became known as Word of Faith. And when I was about 9 years old, I experienced a couple of things that kind of changed my life and could have changed my life for a very different reason. And I've told this story before, but when I was, I guess 9, maybe I was 8. My sister is here. She was old, still is old, but she would probably have better memory. Maybe I was 8 when my mom was diagnosed with melanoma cancer. Was I 8? Was it 74? You guys remember the 70s? Oh yeah. This is one of my goals is to experience every decade. But I don't remember the early 70s, so I need to live to at least the early to mid 70s. Just thought I'd point that out in case you need to know. But my mom was diagnosed with melanoma cancer, and she went and had surgery. Mom had a thing on her back about that big around where they cut out that cancer. I always thought it was sort of cool and gross at the same time as a young dude. But when she went to have this done, the doctor said, "We think we got it all, but it could come back." And so, I don't know, a year? 3? I don't think Sandy knows what she's talking about. It seems like a year to me. But we're talking 77? That's too late. I think that's too late. Anyway, you were working? That's weird. I was just at home. See, I feel like an only child. Both of my sisters are extremely old, and so they were gone by the time I was even cognizant of the world. But anyway, the cancer returned with a vengeance, and it was all through her lungs, what I guess now would be termed, and maybe then was termed, stage 4 cancer. But anyway, the doctor said it's returned. It's, I believe, in your lymph nodes and also in your lungs. You have about 6 months to live. You are going to die. There's nothing we can do. So I remember the day that Mom came home, walking through the door from the carport to the kitchen, and she said, "We've decided we're not going back," meaning we're not going back to the doctor. Now, either in the meantime or after that, my chronologist over here may be able to tell you, but there used to be events in this town called the Full Gospel Businessmen Fellowship Meeting, where you would go and they would have a meal, and then they would have some dude that was a businessman, and he would share some testimony. It was usually about he was on drugs and he was this horrible person, and now he's saved. And so that's one reason when I was a kid I thought I can never be a preacher unless I go and do something really bad so I can tell the story of I used to be on drugs and now I'm not. But that's another story. But it was actually held at what we now call the porn place. It used to be Ted Williams Steakhouse. Had a big cow on top of it. Do you know what I'm talking about? Next to Buckhorn Bowling down here, which is not there anymore, I guess. But they had the best hamburgers. Oh, it was amazing. But anyway, they had, it was there, and there was a table set up with books that you could buy. And it was monitored. In fact, this lady had a bookstore on Benton Street, and her name was Theda Pritchard. And she was blind, by the way. So my mom found a little book on that table called Exceedingly Growing Faith by a guy named Kenneth Hagin. And she began to read that book and apply certain things in that book. And we'll go through all that story someday. maybe more, but over a protracted period of time, my mom began to deteriorate physically. You could tell, you know how you sort of see somebody and you're like, I think they have cancer, or I know they have cancer. I mean, she wasn't going through chemo, so I guess she kept her hair. I don't know why her hair would have fallen out. She kept her hair. And I remember she had such pain in her left arm. I remember that. But she sort of deteriorated, and my mom was, rather rotund, let's say. And so she sort of wasted away. But she found some truths in that book from Scripture. And my mom, I believe, this is where, I'm a skeptic, and I share that all the time. And, Mom never went back to the doctor. But she had 6 months to live, and she lived for 30-something more. And I believe she was healed. Now, that sounds weird, and that's one reason I'm sharing that is there are some things that I've experienced as a young person and then as a young pastor. Believe it or not, when I was 22 years old, I was going to Bible school in Tulsa, and I pastored a little church in Dixon that was originally called Gospel Tabernacle. Did I change the name? I don't even remember this. Okay, we called it Gospel Tabernacle? That's weird. So, can you imagine me pastoring a place called Gospel Tabernacle? But about 150 people. And I would drive back and forth. I would get out of school on Friday, and we'd drive home, and I would preach Sunday morning and Sunday night, because you weren't really saved if you didn't have church on Sunday night back then. Everybody would say, you're backslid. You don't even have church on Sunday night. Then I would drive back to Tulsa, 55-mile-an-hour speed limit back then, and I would go to school Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. We got out at noon. I would get in my car and drive back and preach on Wednesday night, drive back to Tulsa, go to school Thursday. So anyway, but in that experience, there were multiple times in that sort of time period, and even starting as early as 16, 17, where I would have an interaction with some people who were really, really sick, some of them terminally. Now, as you read through the stories of Jesus in the New Testament, there's miracles and healings and things. So I haven't experienced much of the, I spit on somebody or told him to go wash in the pool, and they came again seeing, although I have experienced a person that was completely deaf instantly be able to hear. And experience the supernatural things, but mainly, if I had time to interact with somebody, and what I'm going to talk about today is prayer, by the way. A lot of times when it comes to prayer, we think, well, it's almost like a crapshoot. Baby needs a new pair of shoes, and you sort of throw the dice, and well, that didn't work. And we think if we pray and it happens, and we pray and it doesn't happen, I just don't really know what the system is here. It's just up to God. It's all really, really mysterious. But I've had a lot of experiences where I had time to go and talk to the person. Not to pray, just to sort of see where they are. What do you believe? And give them different books, spend an hour or so talking with them, and saw several people that were healed. I don't know any way to say it. But because that sounds weird, anybody that talks about healing today, you expect them to be wearing a white suit and to knock people over and then take an offering. Or something. And so I, over the years, have sort of backed away from that. When we started Stonebrooke, if you never were at Stonebrooke when we started, it was mainly geared, which I would love to still do today, but there's reasons I need to do this now. But it was geared toward outsiders, people that had never, we said it's a church for people that don't like church. And like, how many of you would that apply to today? You don't like church. See, you're afraid to raise your hand. I don't like church. But I don't like traditional church. But it was geared toward outsiders, so there was things, outsiders are freaked out enough. So there's certain things that I haven't talked about because I don't want to freak them out more when they come to church through, this wild Pentecostal thing. And please don't be freaked out, but the doors are locked. You cannot leave. But no, there's nothing weird going to happen except me. So I just want to share some things that I have let go of. I'm not presenting myself as an expert on these things at all. I just want to present some things that I think Jesus revealed for your consideration, because this is a sore spot with so many people, and they have a hard time understanding it. So we are doing some, we're going to fix some things technologically that need to be updated, but for now I have to scroll. Okay, if you have a question, by the way, at any time, if you're here in the building, you can just shoot your hand up or just blurt it out. We don't care. And we can stop and talk about it. Or if you're watching online, if you want to text it to 415 SB Rocks, we will talk about it eventually. And I love that people ask questions. And this whole thing I'm talking about comes from sort of a combination of questions I've gotten on the subject. Now here's a question I want to start with. Do you get all your prayers answered? Anybody? You get all your prayers answered? Now, what do you mean by that? Oh, what in the heck does that mean? Because that's really interesting. And I'm glad that you're bold enough to do that. This is Shari, by the way. She's one of my neighbors. Shari says, I may not always get what I want, but I always get an answer. Is that what you said? Okay. Now listen, I'm just going to use this. Don't get mad at me. How many of you, that seems a little bit like a Christian cop-out? Yep. And we're going to talk about that. But is there anybody else? Because if you get all your prayers answered, I'm going to sit down and let you talk. Because this is a big deal. Now, how do you know if your prayer has been answered? What? Okay, what would be the evidence of it? Things happened that you asked for. Does anybody else have a different way of thinking? Like, how do you know? If you pray for a thing, how do you know it was answered? What is it that you use to say, yep, that one was answered, or nope, that one was a dud? It's like shooting off fireworks or something. I don't know. What criteria do you use?
Well, the criteria, I think, would be what Jesus said. If you ask anything in my name, I will do it.
You don't have to preach for me, Eric. Just to in general, what people use as a criteria is, well, I asked for a puppy, and I prayed really loudly so the rest of my family would hear, but I didn't get a puppy, so that prayer wasn't answered. You know, I'm being overly simplistic, but if I ask for a thing and it doesn't show up in a prescribed amount of time, maybe, you know, if I'm asking for a wife when I'm 23 and she doesn't show up till I'm 93, that's not a lot of help. You know what I mean? So in some instances, okay, I need this, and I need this by this amount of time. So how do you know if your prayer has been answered? Most people would say, if I get it, it was answered. If I don't get it, it was not. Could we kind of agree that's the way most people think? Okay. So today I want to present maybe a different way of thinking about it. Now, Christians make stuff up. You know? And this is... What? Oh, show me the toes. We may actually talk about show me the toes. But you don't even know what show me the toes is. Just hang on. We might get to it. But something that's always bothered me about Christians, and keep in mind, I would consider myself, I don't call myself that, but I know what you're talking about when you say Christian. But Christians, they make up things that sound really good, and they sound really religious. And preachers use these certain things. Well, stuff like this, for example. God doesn't always remove the storm, but he promises to be with you through the storm. Doesn't that sound good? This is where Christians, and I've been in churches where they've said this a lot, and you see this on Facebook in a meme all the time, and that's where Christians go, that's good, that's good. It's also not in the Bible. Not in the Bible. What? Who said that? Oh, that's in the Old Testament. Well, if you don't know the chapter and verse, sorry, don't bring it up. Now, she is talking about there is an Old Testament scripture in Isaiah, when you pass through the fire, it's talking symbolically. But Christians in general need to make an excuse for why certain things aren't working. And so it's a mysterious thing that God is happening. God won't always remove the storm, but he promises to be with you through the storm. Now, Eric just said, whatever Jesus said. And I say this all the time. And to me, this is the centerpiece, the core, fundamental foundation of understanding God is Jesus reveals who God is. Whatever Jesus said, whatever Jesus did, that's who God is. Not, and this is hard for we Christians, not necessarily what we see, feel, and hear or observe around us, but what did Jesus say and do? Well, there are 2 times that I'm aware that Jesus was in a storm with somebody, and he did not go through it, he stopped it. Now, that's not, here's one reason that I've pulled away from some of these things, because I've been in so many churches that they use this condemningly, I don't know if that's a word, to sort of classify this hierarchy of faith. So you've gone through the storm, and you've prayed, and it's not happening. There must be sin in your life. I lived my life thinking, oh, there's sin in my life somewhere. I was always concerned with sin in my life. Something's happening, the reason I can't get to God, whatever, there's sin. But when you talk about this thing, it made you feel bad. Oh, I'm going through a storm. I must not be as spiritual as everybody else. And so I may have to constantly come back and preface that that's not what we're talking about. But this isn't something that Jesus revealed. Okay? Here's some other stuff that Christians make up. Sometimes God wants to do something in you before he does something for you. Again, this is implying there's something deficient in you. There's a character trait that God needs to work on before he just starts handing out stuff. God's not, and they will say, here's another thing Christians say, God's not the heavenly vending machine. You just push a button and out comes whatever you need. Okay, he's got to do something in me before he does something for me. And Christians go, oh, that's good. Preach on! Stuff like that, you know. Here's another one. God always answers your prayer. See, this is Shari. Shari says this. Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes the answer is wait a while. And maybe there's other things. Sometimes the answer is, why the heck are you even asking that? You know what I mean? Maybe I was selfish with that. I remember going to church years ago, a little church in Dixon called Burnett Church. And that would probably be a good suggestion. No, I'm just kidding. Burnett. We pronounced people that we knew with that name, Burnett. But this church was Burnett Church. And the pastor at the end, he asked, I ask you, God, that this, I ask you, God, that this. And then the last thing he said was, and God, help us not to over-ask. Where in the Bible does it say don't over-ask? Well, nope, sorry. That's your quota for today. I have all these other people. I haven't even got to China today. There's a billion people over there I got to get to. You have asked 3 things. That's a little, that you're pushing the limit now. What is that? Help us not to over-ask. But God always answers your prayer. Is this in the Bible? It's not. I just saw this one last night. When you get what you want, that's God's direction. It helps when you make up a thing as a Christian, especially as a preacher. If it rhymes, it sounds like it's from God. When you get what you want, that's God's direction. When you don't get what you want, that's God's protection. Ooh, yeah, I see. In other words, you really don't know what you want. You don't know what's best for you. People say that all the time. We really don't know what's best for us. The rats have gotten bigger. What is that back there? When you don't get what you want, that's God's protection. But how do you know if your prayer has been answered? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Now, here's the first thing to consider. Because when people talk about prayer, very few people stop to define what it is. Paul had this to say to the church at Ephesus. This is right after the famous section where Paul talks about put on the armor of God. Anybody grow up in church where you actually went through the motions of putting on the armor of God? I'll put on the belt of truth and the breastplate of righteousness and the shoes of peace and take the shield of faith. Did you ever do that? Isn't church a weird place? We did weird things in church. But anyway, at the end of that, talking about the armor of God, Paul says this, and pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all, here's this weird thing we do where I ask you to repeat a word with me, with all kinds of prayer. People, if you ask them, what is prayer? And it would be, ask for this, ask for that. But there's different kinds of prayer, and sometimes when people talk about prayer, they take the rules or the sort of the, I don't even know what the guidelines for one type of prayer, and they add it over here. For example, let me share, what are different kinds of prayer? There's the prayer of consecration and dedication. Anytime I talk about praying and asking for something, people will bring up a certain prayer that Jesus prayed. And in fact, if you went to church, did you ever hear a pastor pray? He's praying for something, pray, 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 pray. And then at the end, he would say, if it be your will. Anybody? Okay. When did Jesus say, if it be your will? That's right. Jesus, in the Garden of Gethsemane, he's about to go to the cross. He's facing certain apprehension and even fear concerning it. He invites 3 of his disciples into the Garden of Gethsemane, and he falls down and he prays, Lord, if there's any other way, let's do that. Nevertheless, your will be done. Okay? If it be your will, he's not even really saying if it be your will. I don't know, I'd have to go actually read it. But he's basically saying, I want your will to be done. And so, whatever that is, I'm willing to do it. Now, here's where, see, this is why I like this smaller group, because I'm able to say certain things. There's a saying that people say sometimes when they need a certain thing, maybe it's healing or a financial thing or a relational thing, whatever it is. And they, as they're praying, will either say at the end, Lord, if it's your will, do that. If it's not, do whatever you want to. I always wondered when I was a kid, if God's going to do whatever he wants to, why am I wasting time going through this motion of praying and asking? See, I want us to stop and sort of face the things that we believe about everything, but especially concerning prayer. If we don't pray, is God going to go ahead and do whatever he wants anyway? It's a complete waste of time for me to pray. If I'm praying for a certain thing and I say, if it be your will, do that, can I have any type of faith that he's going to do that? The only way I could govern whether or not God wanted to do that is if it happens, he must have wanted to. If it didn't happen, he must not have wanted to. And most Christians live in that world, and it's perfectly fine. I'm not mad at them or me who have been there. But is that what Jesus taught? And Christians say this thing. There's people even will preach an entire sermon called, even if he doesn't. Have you ever heard a Christian pray, I believe God is going to do this, but even if he doesn't, I will serve him. Job even, they quote the book of Job. Even though he slay me, yet will I serve him. And so they're praying for a certain thing. I believe God is going to do this, but even if he doesn't, I'll still believe in him or whatever. And people will say, oh, what a great statement of faith that is. Okay?
The 3 guys in the fiery furnace said the same thing.
They did. Can I wait and talk about that in a minute? What were their names? Radchak. I actually like that. That's not their names. Their names were Hananiah, Azariah, and something else. That was their Babylonian names. I'm just messing with you. Come on. Their names were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But let me talk about that another time. Is it a statement of faith to say, even if he doesn't? That's a great statement of faith, they say. Now here's I'm just throwing this out there. See, this is why for some reason you choose to come here. It's because you're not just going to hear what you hear at every other church. That is a great statement of dedication and consecration. That is a very noble thing to say, that I'm not going to govern my dedication to God by what he gives me. I'm not just serving God for the loaves and the fishes, as Jesus would say. But it's not a statement of faith. And we'll return. We'll probably do a whole thing where I'll show you on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I don't want to get distracted there today, because they say a very similar thing. And I also don't want to get into the fact that it may not be historical. But anyway, it's in the Bible. When Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, he's praying a prayer of consecration and dedication. He's not asking for something from God to receive it. He's dedicating, I don't want to do this necessarily because of the pain, because of various things. Nevertheless, I'll do whatever you want. That's a prayer of consecration and dedication. As Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is in one sense as well. I want to talk about a detail of that, but we won't today. Here's the prayer of intercession. What is the prayer of intercession? Anybody know? You ever heard of such a thing? You're praying for someone else. And this is an important distinction. If John needs something, I can pray for him, but I don't have any authority in his life. We talked a little bit about authority last week, and we'll talk, not last week, 2 weeks ago, we'll talk about it some more next time. I can pray another prayer that I don't even have up here, the prayer of agreement. And this is what I did when I was a pastor, when there were different people that were sick or whatever. Because I've been to all kinds of churches, and they would have a thing during the sermon. Okay, any prayer requests? And you would have, pray for my Aunt Bertha. She has bunions. Okay, pray for Aunt Bertha's bunions. And different things that maybe were serious. And then they would do this at the end. The cherry on top, are there any unspoken requests? And people, yes, I have an unspoken request. So I really don't know how we'll tell if that one gets answered, because we didn't even speak it. I'm not even sure God probably knows. But anyway, don't get me off on unspoken requests, I'll get distracted. But in praying for somebody else, prayer of intercession. And someday we'll have a discussion on what that really is. There's an experience with that, and I've seen some pretty cool things. But that's not what we're talking about. In James said this: is anyone sick? Let him call for the elders of the church. Let him pray over him, anointing him with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer of faith will save the sick. What I want to talk about this time, and maybe even a little bit next time, is the prayer of faith. Jesus, in dealing with different people, always mentioned this word faith, and it really trips people up, and it's really been used against people. But just because it's been misused and misunderstood doesn't mean we shouldn't return to it. The prayer of faith. Now, do you mind if I stop? And it doesn't matter if you mind, I'm going to do it anyway. Do you mind if I stop and just step over here and take a little side journey, okay? The prayer of faith will, what's the next word? Save the sick. You guys that have been raised in church, what's it mean to be saved? Huh? See? You all changing. You all changing on me. Here, let me give you one that's a little more comfortable for you. Let's see. If you openly declare that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. What's that one mean? See? Why didn't you say that a while ago? See, look, I was just at one. You could have said it then. The prayer of faith will save the sick, right? Saved. I'd like to point these out because Christians always say to me, Mark, you're picking and choosing. And man, can I show Christians how they pick and choose. Because they don't use this one. Since it's Mother's Day, I didn't even think to put this one up there. There's another verse where Paul says that women will be saved through childbearing. So really, every woman that's had a child is not going to hell. You don't even have to stay the rest of the time here. You can go on home. You're good. See, Christians, it means one thing here. In the original text, it's the exact same word. The word is sozo. Okay, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but that doesn't mean anything about going to heaven. It means they will be delivered. They will be healed. They will be restored. Okay? And it even says he'll be forgiven if he's committed sins. Oh, no, he has to repent and ask. All he has to do, according to the Bible, is call for somebody to anoint him with oil and pray the prayer of faith over him, and his sins are forgiven. But when he says saved, he's not talking about going to heaven. And when it says saved here, he's not talking about going to heaven. It's talking about being delivered, being restored, being protected, something that happens now. There is no difference in the word. Okay, so we're going to talk about the prayer of faith. And since I don't have my thing, I don't even know what the next slide is. So this is my definition of prayer. And see if you can agree with this. Because when people say, I need prayer, they could just as equally say, I could just as equally say, I need to receive from God something I need. And this is going to throw some of you Baptists off and Pentecostals. And or desire. Now, how many of you have ever been in a church where they suggested you might be able to get what you need? We're not sure because you really don't know what you need. And there might be sin in your life and God might want to do something in you before he does something for you. I don't know. He may want to go through the storm with you. We just have no idea what God is like. I don't even know what we have at church, or I'm standing up here telling you about God because I don't know what he's like. But so we can't ever know. But it's been suggested, now just because you want something, you can't get that. Anybody? Sort of been suggested that? You got that feeling? How many of you think whatever you want right now, you can get it from God? Well, you got to raise your hand on one of them. Now, see, I'm glad that you don't, because that's how Christians are. We just go through life and we don't know. We don't know what to say and we don't even want to think about it. But the prayer of faith is receiving from God whatever I need and or desire. Stick with me. I'll show you that second part is even true. Now, I'm not going to take an offering. I'm not wearing a white suit. And I'm not going to ask you to donate $1,000 so your prodigal will come home. I'm not that guy. But there are things that I have let go, and there are things that Jesus taught that I just want to share for your consideration. I don't say I know everything about this, or I'm living in all of this. Like I said, I've let it go. But this is my definition of prayer that I'm going to work with. In Matthew 8, large crowds followed Jesus as he came down the mountainside. He had just finished with the Sermon on the Mount, by the way. You know, love your enemies. You've heard it said, do this, I say this. Suddenly, a man with leprosy approached him. There's so many things I could say, I don't want to take all day. But there are 19 individual cases, and I say this a lot, in the New Testament, in the 4 Gospels, of Jesus healing an individual. Okay? 19 individual cases. In those cases, all of them, of course, received healing. There is never one example of someone approaching Jesus, asking for something they needed or desired, that they did not receive it. This is all I have. This is where I have to go back. This is my reference point. My reference point is, yeah, but my Aunt Betty or I need new names. I use old names. The old names are kind of coming back though, so eventually. What's like a modern name? If you were having a baby today, what would you name that baby?
Gertrude.
Thank goodness Eric isn't having any more babies. What are the popular names? What? Braden? Braden, okay. If, Braden, what else? Yeah, I want a girl name. Brooklyn. That's your child's name. She is 20. So, if I know my Aunt Brooklyn or my Uncle Braden had this experience, or I asked for something and I didn't get it, I approached God. That's not my reference point. We can talk about those things, and we should. But I'm trying to get us today just to see if we're going to say that Jesus reveals God, then anything we need to know about God, we have to go back to that reference point. If we're not experiencing something that we think we should experience or that we see happening, we need to start back at the reference point of Jesus. So here's a man that approaches him, and he has leprosy. He knelt down before him, and he said the exact thing that almost everyone I know would say, and they would say today. Lord, if you are willing. Now, does this man know if Jesus is willing? No, he doesn't know. What does he know? If you are willing, you can heal me and make me clean. This is the dilemma. When we're praying, almost everyone that I know, including me many times, we're praying about something, but if we were really honest with ourselves, we would be saying, I know you can do this, but I'm not sure you will. Would you agree with that? Here is what, anyway, Jesus, here's what we have to know. If you don't get anything else, and I've said this before, but I really want you to understand that faith begins where the will of God is known. If you don't know what the will of God is, at that particular moment, you are not in faith at all. Okay? That's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing at all. Because sometimes when I talk about these things, people will say, and people have been beaten with this. This is why, it's another reason I back away from this. The churches I've been in, it's, well, you just don't have enough faith. You need to go study more. You need to go whatever more. And it was always a work of, okay, I'm not praying enough. I'm not living a holy enough life. By the way, prayers being answered have nothing to do with how good you are. Well, this is weird. I've done this thing the past few years where I'll try to do something that historically has been thought of as sin in the circles that I go in, that I have been in before, and then pray. I'm weird, aren't I? Because you have in your mind, oh, I haven't been doing this, or I have been doing this, and now I need something from God. Oh, I wish the past week I'd done better. I'd read my Bible more and I'd prayed, and I hadn't watched whatever that particular movie was, or I hadn't gone to that particular event, or I hadn't cussed that person out and used various digits to tell them my feelings as I was driving down the road. And now I have to approach a holy God, and he's probably not going to do it because he's been watching. That's how I've always felt about prayer. It has nothing to do with it at all. If it has anything to do with what you have accomplished, you're not in faith at all, and God is totally unimpressed. In fact, we'll read a story in a minute, and I'll sort of point that out again. But faith begins where the will of God is known. If you don't know the will of God, that's fine. Don't pray for that thing yet. Figure out what's God's will. It's a little bit, and this illustration may not go anywhere. I don't know the end of this. I just know the beginning. I just thought. Today is Mother's Day. How many of you have been a mother or a mother would like to be a mother. Okay. How many of you have already received a Mother's Day gift? Now, I'm not going to ask this one. Is there any mothers that aren't in the presence of the gift giver that were underwhelmed with the gift? Come on. Come on. There you go. Here is what should happen. Like, is Jeannie in here? She's not in here. Later today, Jeannie is going to receive a Mother's Day gift. Now, much research went into this gift that Jeannie is going to receive. We didn't just wake up and decide, hey, what should we get her? About pack of Oreos. I don't know. We know her. We know her. I've been with a woman way too long. I've been with a woman 43 years. 43 years. I've known her. Her children know her. We know what her will is. There she is. Everybody be quiet. Don't look at her. We know what her will is. Research went into it before the action was taken. But nobody thinks that way when it comes to prayer. Let's just throw something against the wall and see if it sticks. Faith begins where the will of God is known. Oh, time gets away. I don't want to stay here all day. So, if you're thinking, here's sort of an equation for you. Is it God's will to whatever, fill in the blank? If your answer is, I don't know, you're not ready to pray a prayer of faith yet. And you are not in any type of faith. Okay? You're not currently in faith. See, I told you. There it is in black and white. Now, this leper comes to Jesus. Jesus reached out and touched him. This is what he said. I am willing. Now, when you hear that, do you think, yeah, he was willing for that guy, but he's not for me? Or do you think Jesus reveals everything about God? If this person approached God and needed a certain thing, and he didn't know if it was God's will, and Jesus said it was his will to heal him, it must be his will to heal me. I'm not putting you up or down for either one, but that's a place where we need to get to where we base what we believe God's will is upon what Jesus said and did. And Jesus, to me, revealed to all people for all time, I'm willing. And he touched him, and he was healed. And then we went through this thing that he said in John 38, I've come down from heaven to do the will of God. If I want to know what God's will is, I look at Jesus. Because he said everything that I do is that. And so I won't do this. Now, let me show this. And I'll probably end with this. What time do we start? I don't want the moms to have to stay here too long. When Jesus returned to Capernaum, a Roman officer, this guy isn't Jewish. This guy probably has never read the Bible. Okay? A Roman officer came and pleaded with him. Lord, my young servant lies in bed, paralyzed and in terrible pain. Now, before I do the next slide, let me just say that, we have 4 Gospels, and the 4 Gospels sometimes they tell the same story. And in other Gospels, we find out that this Roman officer did not physically come to see Jesus. Some Jewish people who knew this Roman officer came to talk to Jesus. And they said, this man is worthy of this. He's built us a synagogue. This is how Christians pray. Now, you don't have to raise your hand, but I think everybody here is guilty a little bit of, Lord, I've had to go for 4 years to listen to Mark talk. I'm there all the time. It's really boring, but I'm still doing it. We sort of bargain with God. There's the foxhole prayers. Lord, if you'll get me out of this, I promise I'll never whatever again. You may not have said those exact words, but we do this little bargaining thing. We give our credentials, we give our history, and we sort of compare ourselves. I know a guy down the street. You seem to be doing good for him, and I'm a lot better than he is. So I don't know what you're sort of missing the target. Do you know my address? I don't think you're coming to the right place here. And so we do this sort of bargaining. That's what these Jewish people did. Here's Jesus' response when someone comes to him and says, my servant is sick and in terrible pain. I'm sharing this because I want us to change the way we think about God. That's Jesus' entire purpose. He came here to say, you're thinking about God wrong. The Jewish people that came to talk to Jesus about this Roman officer were thinking about God wrong. If you do good things, God will do good things for you. That is the entire doctrine of the Pharisees. They believed if a person was wealthy, it had to be because he wasn't sinning, because he did really good things, and God's doing good things for him. But here's Jesus' response. Jesus said, I will. I'll come and heal him. If we get time sometime, I'll talk about the going to and heal him. It's a very interesting thing to see the various ways that Jesus administered healing. And there's a big thing about this that I'd love to talk about. We won't today. But the officer said, we learned from one of the other accounts that as Jesus headed to his house, the officer sent some other people to him and intercepted him before he got to his house. But the officer said, Lord, I'm not worthy to have you come into my home. Just say the word from where you are. King James says, speak the word only. This is something that my mom held on to when she had cancer and was doing her best to figure out, was it God's will for her to be healed or not? King James Bible says, speak the word only. I don't have to feel something. I don't have to experience something. Whatever you said, I believe that's enough. Speak the word from where you are, and my servant will be healed. That's an amazing thing. You know how I know it's an amazing thing? Well, I'm going to say this, then I'll show you. Now, this Roman officer, he said, I know this, not because I read the Bible. I know this because I am under the authority of my superior officers. I have authority over my soldiers. I only need to say, go, and they go. Come, and they come. And I say to my slaves, do this, and they do it. They don't have to say, and they don't say, you know, I'm not in the mood right now. Now, Mark here, and he probably gets tired of me using him as a military example, but he was a sergeant major. If you said to one of a first sergeant or any other troops, I need you to go down there to the other end of the field and clean up that pile of trash. And they said, you know, I ain't feeling it, Sarge. Just ain't feeling that today. I've had a long day. You got me up at 5. It's 2:30 now. I sort of like an afternoon nap. What would happen to that man?
Everybody's got options.
See, I need to preach on that now. Everybody's got options. I'm distracted. But yes, a military person knows this isn't a choice. This wasn't a suggestion. I say go, they go. If you, Jesus, say he's healed, he's healed. That is faith. Now, Jesus does this, and this is why I know this was amazing. When Jesus heard this, he was amazed. I want Jesus to be amazed with me. I want Jesus to go, not. Those are the two options I see when dealing with Jesus. Jesus, I know this because I must have hit my back button here. When Jesus heard this, he was amazed. Turning to those who were following him, all the people who are following him are Jewish. He said, I tell you the truth, I haven't seen, now look at this, faith like this. King James Bible says, such great faith. What is faith like this? We're going to find out that whatever faith like this is, it resulted in this officer's servant being healed. We find out from one of the other accounts, he's at the point of death. His servant was healed. Faith like this. Well, is that the reason he was healed? Let's ask Jesus. When Jesus heard this, he was amazed. This is another translation. He said, truly I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. I already said that. And I tell you this, that many Gentiles will come from all over the world, from east and west, sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the kingdom of heaven. But many Israelites, those for whom the kingdom was prepared will be thrown into darkness, will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. We've talked about weeping and gnashing of teeth. Don't let me get distracted. Jesus is basically saying, you guys, they were the Christians of the day. If you replace Jewish and Gentile with Christian and outsiders, this was a unique thing. Jesus had been hanging around people that knew the Bible, that had been around God, and he finally finds somebody that doesn't know anything about the Bible, but he just simply believes that Jesus, whatever he says, goes. And he was amazed. Now this is the part. This is uncomfortable. Jesus said to the Roman officer, "Go back home because you believed. Because you believed, it has happened." This is a statement that people don't like to say. But I didn't say it. Jesus said, because you believed, it happened. Today, could it be because we believe it would happen? Well, I believed, Mark. Okay, we'll talk about that going forward. But this person exhibited that quality of knowing the will of God without even having a Bible. He said, you're just like my superior officer. He tells me this is the training we're going to do for today. Yes, sir. And it happens. Not, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, even if it doesn't. See, this is where I always focus on Jesus, because I can take scriptures from all over the Bible and make them say all kinds of things. And it may even be true, but my reference point is Jesus said, because you believe. Faith begins with the will of God is known. I think I want to quit. Let's see if the next verse is interesting. Oh, no, that it is interesting, but we won't talk about it today. Are there any quick questions? We've been here about an hour and 5 minutes. Well, you've probably been here earlier than that. We didn't start until a certain time. Do you have questions? Oh, such a great question. Next time we'll talk about that. The question is, and it's a question that, it would take a long time to talk about that. I can sum it up, but I don't want to be too simplistic or dismissive of your question, because that question has a lot behind it. The question is, how do you know what God's will is in your particular situation? Number one, you may not, and so there's a way we find out. Number two, though, if I can see any time where Jesus said or did something that relates to my situation, whatever Jesus said or did is the will of God. Okay? So my faith begins and ends. That's why I like to use this verse where Jesus said, Jesus didn't say it, in Hebrews, the author of Hebrews says, Jesus is the author and finisher of my faith. I begin with what did Jesus say or do to start my faith journey, if you will. Along the way, questions and doubts may come, but I end with, no matter Jesus said or did this, he's the Alpha and Omega, beginning and the end. I start and end with him. Well, that's simplistic, and I'm not trying to dismiss it with the answer, Jesus. You know what I'm saying? But that's a good question. We'll talk about that in more detail. Okay? Thanks for being here, guys.